to do talking about some research project we're working on. I have a lot of moral support with me today. Guttorm is probably just around the corner. Marek is participating in this research project. Tony is participating. You also Hui yesterday. So we are a group of people trying to sort things out. So this is a research project called Cirrus, which is the name of a cloud. Should be a very nice cloud. It's a 4-year project. We are about halfway. So when you do research, we don't really have all the answers. We're trying to ask a lot of questions, and we're proposing some ideas, and we see what fits and what doesn't fit. The reason for presenting this is also to get feedback from you all. If you have comments, ideas, think about it in the wrong way, or should spend more time thinking about certain things, I'd like to have some feedback throughout the presentation. This project consists of SuperOffice, Visma, and Sintef. So Sintef is basically responsible for the research part of it, and SuperOffice and Visma are the industry partners. It's founded by the Norwegian Research Council and the companies involved. So the focus on this project has been starting with requirements, use cases, technology, practices, and creating some prototypes, and finally what they call dissemination and exploitation. So dissemination means I talk to you about what we're doing, hopefully you tell me what we are doing is okay or not, and exploitation is actually starting to use it. So the first big result we have seen so far is what we are playing with VS Code. Thinking that if you want to make sustainable customizations in VS Code, we need to have a better way of dealing with source code, not only inside the browser. So what I'm trying to cover today is then the technology part of it. I will be talking a little bit about processes, but not too much. I'm more interested in the technology part, so I'll spend most of the time talking about that. We'll think about different environments, production test, EU, Brexit, whatever that means. And finally, I would like to think out loud about sandbox. I've been thinking about sandbox for a long time. I got some help to try to kind of rationalize around it, and after that, it was so obvious to me. So I'm kind of skeptical to how it's going to be to present that, because maybe everything is obvious to you. This wasn't me, so we'll see when we get there. So, we have this kind of traditional stack. In this stack, we are using different technology. Sometimes it's multi-tenant, and sometimes it's single-tenant. So if we start looking at the database, we are actually only using tables and fields and some indexes in the database. We're not using much of it. But if you want to do something, you want to extend on that data model. We don't want you to remove any of our stuff, but you probably need to have some sort of more data. We're going to reflect a little bit about where more data could live a little bit later. Then we have the server, which is the traditional business logic, and that's where we basically are thinking about net server or customer service. How can we modify that? We know from an on-site universe that we had all the plugins, Sentry plugins and everything. There's no real way we could put in binary code in online. And then we have what's on top there is called the client. I think that is where we are today are seeing the biggest shift in technology. When we spoke about client 5 years ago in a web client, most of the stuff in the client was executed server side, and you have a little bit on in the browser, reloading pages every time. If you now look at frameworks like Angular, you see that you only have business logic server side. You have maybe mood authentication and everything out of it. So this layer is actually becoming smaller and smaller, whereas the UI on top is now more or less happening in the browser. So if you look at that from a multi-tenant, single-tenant perspective, if you're running in a browser, you are single-tenant, single-user. I mean, you're not sharing that browser session with anybody else. So customizing that has not so big consequences. It's basically the same as before. You have a rich client running there now. When you come to the server, that is when you are starting to share resources with other customers and other users. Same as for the business logic. In a database, when you have a public cloud service offering, we see two basic strategies. Some companies tend to put all the customer into a few databases, sharing clients, if you are. You typically see that in ERP systems, even for an ERP system hosted by a large organization. They would have multiple clients inside the CRM database. So you basically have, not the ERP database, so you basically have one database, but you have like some sort of segregation within the database. Maybe as easy as like a separate column just saying which kind of client it is. But what we are doing in SuperOffice is that each customer has his own database, which actually means it is for us possible to modify the database schema per customer. That is not really possible if you have a pure multi-tenant environment, because you can have hundreds of different kinds of schemas inside the same database. It doesn't make sense. There's some different kind of benefits from having single-tenant database. It means that we can do backups and restores, which I'll be talking a lot about later. So in the Cirrus project, we have been looking at different sort of technologies for customizing. So this is not a SuperOffice context, but like this is throughout the project. We have been playing with ideas. Some of the ideas that we know is not relevant, some might be relevant. We have separated between what we call in-product customization and what we refer to as parallel stacks. When it comes to in-product customization, we're basically meaning code running in that stack that we are shipping, in the browser or the database or the service layer, in over servers, whatever. It's not running on some other infrastructure. We have been looking into three kind of different strategies for storing data. We have what Marek developed over the last couple of years with Ludwig was a continuous database development model, where you basically could describe a set of steps, and you can have several features in parallel, and we can extend on that. So, for example, a customization could have their steps, and that schema could grow. So we have like a model for customizing the database that way. Visma was researching something they call schema extensions, basically saying that, well, I'm going to add this field to this table. Well, I probably need to create another table aside to link with, so it's kind of virtually extending the table, but it's not really actually extending the table. I think that's similar to what we do with extra fields in CS as well. And I'll be mentioning microservices later on, but one of the common strategies when you're dealing with like microservices is that they have a separate data store. Try not to share too much data, but basically means you have your own database wherever you are residing. So that's like a different way of dealing with data. So the distance is greater if you have a separate data store. Latencies and all those problems become an issue, but I mean, you have full flexibility. You can do whatever you please. Business logic, we have been looking into a couple of different things. We have been looking into running binary code on the servers, which we will not do. We had Hans Oluf had a master thesis where he looked into doing binary code, and he basically proved that that is not safe. So running a Center plugin in online with binary code, you ship us the C# code, we hosting it is not very likely to happen. Then we have this concept of dynamic code. Surrem script is one very good candidate. That is when we have created a language. You are only allowed to do what we have decided that is allowed in that language. So everything that you can do is kind of whitelisted. It's running protected in the sandbox. That we will continue with. Dynamic link is when we're using language constructs in order to execute some code at runtime. That is not safe for the same reasons as native blocks are not safe. Skill is the new client interface language that we are working on, trying to modernize our web applications. We will be looking more into that over the years to come. Razor is a part of MVC where Sintef did some research on how can I actually replace views if the application was created in Razor. So you see that we have researched a set of different technologies and learned quite a bit, and there are different challenges with them. The takes from this is that CDD will going to appear somehow in the customization stack that you can use. CRM script will continue to live in some form. Exactly how, we will come back to, but whatever you do now with CRM script is going to be sustainable. Parallel stacks. So that is when you are running code that is not executed on our platform. You are using our API somehow. Creating a microservice is one thing you can do. You will typically be using our APIs when you're doing that, either REST or event hooks and so forth. So when should you be creating a microservice instead of customizing with CRM script and stuff like that? It's not a very easy answer or easy question to answer. If you look at what a microservice is, it's a separate silo, it's a separate stack. You are responsible for that stack. Typically they say that, well, you need to be a 2-pizza team in order to create a microservice. That means you are typically 3 to 7 people creating something. You will spend months making it. You will maintain it. It will be owned by somebody, either as an app or as a generic customization. But I mean, if you're talking about something that is going to take less than 3 months for 3 people, it's probably not the way you want to be heading. You probably don't want to put a year of work into customizing using CRM script either, because there's going to be too much code. So just kind of somewhere in between there, you have to figure out where am I with this kind of customization? What is my options? You don't want to create a whole lot of infrastructure just for doing a small thing if you could do it with CRM script, but it is a way to create a separate system living aside, and it should be possible to integrate with a lot of stuff. So this is one of the slides that we have been showing in different contexts. You have seen it, maybe not exactly that version, but different versions. If you look at the different layers, we have the database, the business logic, UI. Then we have some different sort of technologies. User-defined fields and configuration being the simplest. Skills, remote API, scripting, programming are more the advanced techniques. On the other side, look at who are we thinking to do this. Administrators, technical consultants, experts, programmers. We see that in the expert programmers, that is where we see that you can do everything, and that is where we're focusing the Cirrus project. We have emphasized a lot more on sustainable customizations, basically pulling us to the left, more on the admin side, because we think that's even more sustainable. But the Cirrus project is mainly focused on the expert developers. And the process for creating something as an expert, especially when you're moving into an app, is a little bit more complex. So this is a model that Guttorm created almost a year ago. So we're trying to kind of see the life cycle of developing an app. You start with development, you have some sort of testing, you go through a certify and publish process. Somebody's using it, and you have to deal with licensing and billing and ordering and stuff like that. It has to be packaged and provisioned into tenants or customers, so customer installations. And finally, we need to focused on operations. So this is more or less the process you see today with the certification in the App Store. It's basically what we have to adhere to. What we have been spending most of the time on in the rest of this presentation will be on the development, test, sandbox, tooling, and so forth. You see that Visual Studio Code is up there. And you see Visual Studio ID, you see in-product ID, basically meaning that there needs to be some sort of development environment that we have to create in order to create sustainable customizations and having a good process for it. And this sandbox that I've been twisting my head around for a while. So let's think about environments. When we are development, we need to have a development environment. When we are testing and before we go into production, we need to have a test and staging environment. And finally, of course, we have the production environment where we have paying customers. So we're talking about 3 instances of everything in order to have these 3 environments. When you think about regions and GDPR and protectionism and everything going on around in the world, EU don't want customer data to be outside EU unless there are a whole lot of agreements. So we need to basically keep data within EU or EEC. We see that UK is leaving, so we have this Brexit thing. What is going to happen with data related to that is hard to predict. There might be some sort of protectionism saying that, well, UK customers must have data in the UK. We'll see. In Nordic, we're fairly flexible, but we know more data centers are being built here as well. What US and Asia will do with regard to protectionism is hard to predict, but it's likely that we will see that we will need more environments. So this is something that we will have many of. But when you create an app, you will start in one environment, and you want the app to be available in several regions and several environments. And you want to have a centralized infrastructure for dealing with that. It might be available in different regions, that might be a property of it, but you don't want to log into 5 different kind of app stores depending on what environment you are in. You want to have like one dashboard shared across. And of course you want to have the same login across all of this infrastructure. But the tools and the portal must be aware that we have a very decentralized infrastructure. So now we are into UML, Unified Modeling Language, which is basically a notation for putting arrows between boxes and numbers and asterisks. So I guess I will lose a couple of you. The asterisk means so many, and the 1 means 1. That's the most important thing from this diagram. So we have this environment in this small box. This is where all the tenants are residing. And we have a developer. He is typically working with some tools in order to develop. It has some sort of repository. We have an app store. We have some authentication system. We have some services, and all of that fits together. So the way SuperOffice CRM Online is constructed today, we basically have 3 copies of this, and it's a one-to-one relation. So we have 3 instances of the App Store with repositories, 3 repositories. When you create an app in the SOD environment, marketing is actually copying that information from the SOD to the stage to the production environment in order to move on, because it's separate instances. We need to have an App Store that is only one of, where we have different versions of the app, and then we need to have some sort of central component being able to govern all of this. And in the Cirrus project, we have come up with a term we call the tenant manager. Actually, we went to LEAP a couple of years ago, lead architecture program in Redmond at Microsoft, and they had this architect. He spoke about the tenant manager. And we were very fascinated because that fitted our need exactly. We tried to Google it, and we didn't find any good references for it. So we basically just hijacked the term for our use and have a couple different definitions for it. I'll be talking about that later. But that's basically one of the core building blocks of the Cirrus project, is identifying that we need this tenant manager role. The role of tenant manager is to know about environments, to know about tenants, to know about apps, what tenants are using, what apps, what version are they using. So basically some sort of central body governing everything. So previous slide we saw that the customizations were running in the environment, which was on here, now it's over there, and we'll focus a little bit more about what is the development environment going to look like. So inside your favorite development environment, you will have different kinds of source code. You might have custom screens, you definitely will have CRM scripts, there will be some sort of model for a database model, and you will be making that. And of course you will have a couple of test tenants where you are pushing the information in test tenant, maybe actually are making some modification inside the tenant as well. You know that if you have a script, and you have programmed that nicely, it recompiles in your head. You're just waiting for it to work on the server. You're pushing it to the server, and then you see you have like this one small little thing you want to modify. You are very tempted to do that inside the built-in editor inside service, right? Because that's going to be very efficient for you to just change these 3 characters or that log greater than to less than or whatever. And you pull it back, and it comes to a point where, well, no, I'm happy with this. I need to kind of push this version of what I have to an app repository so it can be provisioned some other test tenant and then later on some production environment. So you push that to a repository. And we have been playing around saying, well, maybe this app repository of SuperOffice should actually support the Git protocol. So then you can basically be pushing your version of the app to this Git using the Git protocol to your repository. And then you want to push it into your next test tenant to see, did this actually work? The developer's test. The tenant manager would help you do that. You are using some sort of developer portal, telling tenant manager, push that version of the customization to my test tenant. Right? So here you see all the building blocks are playing to push that out. Later on, if you go back to this wheel, after you have pushed that version, Marek or somebody will take that and push into her test tenant in order to certify it. And finally, it will be provisioned to the actual tenant where you have paying customers running your paying version. Does that make sense? Yesterday, Tony mentioned behind this plant, you'll see that there's some unique identifier that we introduced on CRM script. So if I have a script, and this script is running in all sorts of tenants and different environments, I cannot use the primary key of a table, especially if the scripts are only not stored in that table, but in different tables. So I need a global, unique way of referring to a script. Actually Ludwig, has implemented support for that inside the CRM agent. So you should be able, using the CRM agent, to pull out all the scripts and triggers and different stuff. You will be able to get more and more stuff from that agent as you move on with different kind of stuff. Everything will have this global unique identifier. So if you extract that from one tenant, you should be able to push the same script in the other tenant without getting any conflicts. They will have different primary keys, they will sort different tables, but it should be working across the tenants. And that's the same mechanism that we will rely on over here, and it's the same stuff that will give you the opportunity to use VS Code or a command line tool to extract and import and export CRM script in an easy way. So we're making that way of thinking available to you. It's not generally available yet. We are still working on it, stabilizing it. But if you're interested in playing it, to contribute in the VS Code project, using the command line tool that we're creating for it, we will give you access. Yes? So let's spend a few minutes thinking about this tenant manager. Here you see the tenant manager as something that is running outside everything. that doesn't really solve the entire problem, because there needs to be some sort of thing inside the code that understands that there will be variations. I mean, if there's no triggers or events or anything where you have a place to hook in anything, you cannot change anything either. So this kind of tenant manager concept has some has a shadow into the product, so the product must actually support being customized. At the same time, you need to have this thing around it, governing it, that knows about all customizations. The product might ask the tenant manager, what should I run on customizations and get configuration. And the same way, when you are pushing in a customization or upgrading customization, that is an action performed by a tenant manager. And very much likely using this CRM script agent in order to push CRM scripts. So that's kind of the highway we are looking at in order to support customizations. So the same tenant manager is the same thing you see into the graph here. And the product is, of course, the stuff running inside the tenant over there. And the customizations are stored inside this app repository. Now I'm going to change topic completely. Yes?
If we back up to the slides there, I think it would be interesting to ask questions from the attendants to see what you actually think about this model. And does it make sense? Are there things that we are not seeing that possibly you're thinking about? What are your thoughts about these sort of diagrams and the structure and the ideas about using a tenant manager to manage the whole ecosystem? Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Rhoda?
It's kind of abstract for us right now to like give feedback on the tenant manager. But what I extracted from this is that being able to use CRM script to create standard apps, which can be deployed via an app store, that's very, very interesting. And but where the lines go, what the tenant manager does, that's kind of hard.
Okay, I just thought maybe somebody might have additional feedback in terms of how we're sharing this and looking at the in total spread of the infrastructure required in order to support this. Also to reinforce some of the thoughts like, well, how come we don't have this stuff already? And how come we can't do these strong customizations already? And just to give you a little bit of highlights that it's not quite so simple as being able to allow you to drop a DLL into some folder somewhere. There are a lot more moving parts, and it's a pretty complex system that has to be created.
Yeah. Well, if you know comments, I'll just totally change focus on another piece of this big puzzle. Sandbox, that's like a term we are using anytime you want to isolate something in computing. Taking something concrete and making it abstract. Often you would create some sort of VM or separate machine or separate process. Basically, you are creating boundaries in order to do isolation. And this is a very standard answer. Just create a sandbox and you basically solve this isolation problem. So I will try to think a little bit out loud about, is it that easy, and what do we actually mean when we're talking about sandbox? Because it might not really be exactly what we need. So when I just try to describe this to Hui in the summer, or in the spring, he said, you are isolating over time. I was trying to describe the situation where a consultant, actually, he's going to do a large import on Saturday, right? He don't want anybody else to log in. He just want to make that huge import. He want to verify that it works okay. And at some later time, if it works okay, everything is fine. If it's not, he needs to revert, right? So this is kind of, we're isolating in this period of time, so nobody else is changing things. Exactly like the movie, how they destroyed a lot of things just by going back and forth in time. There's another way of isolating too, and that is isolate in space, meaning you have separate tenants where you do different things. Can't you just create a copy, a test environment, and you should be all good to go? That's another way of isolating. So these are the kind of ways you will be talking about. So the problem is that no man is an island, right? These systems are not one-off. They have integrations in all sorts of directions, especially production environments. And also, if you are creating some sort of customization, you are typically developing an integration with something, right? You cannot just block that integration. I mean, you can mock it for a certain period of time, but it comes to a point when you actually have to see that it's running with another test environment. So you can't really isolate it completely. And things are very much interlinked and integrated. And data in one location depends on data in another location as well. So just reverting to something else can be challenging. So this is basically what we have our integration points in CRM Online today. Let's start with Mailgun. That is where when somebody is sending us a support request, mails are coming in, or if you're doing some sort of marketing campaign, we are pushing mails out, right? Just imagine what happens if you restore a to old backup. We have documents stored in Google or Office 365. We don't really have control over those repositories. We have an app store, and in our app store we are encouraging integration with everything. The more you are integrating with, the better for us, because then we know that the customer will be more happy. But it also means that there's more places that our data is referencing, or their data is referencing us. We have the Pocket, we're doing push notifications, we have identities stored in separate repositories, we have documents stored in Azure, and we have other mechanisms. Are you familiar with these railroad style diagrams? I kind of played with the way you kind of describe branches. So let's say I have system A and I have system B, and I want to do this big import. I create a snapshot, I'll take a backup of my view of the universe. And then, of course, I do this kind of import or share transaction where two systems are involved. It doesn't need to be like a transaction as two-phase commit thing, but just where something more than my system is involved. Maybe the easiest is that if somebody is sending me an email, and I'm maybe processing the email and sending a reply saying that, well, I got your email, I will process it, trust me, this is my ID for processing that email. And then something went wrong, so I'm restoring over here. Then you end up in a situation where that the person that sent you an email has a receipt saying, well, I'm going to process your email, hand your request, and you have forgot the request, right? So we cannot have that situation. That means we need to kind of govern that when we are in this kind of temporary sandbox mode. We need to manage those integrations so those things doesn't happen. So we must prevent receiving mails. We cannot tell anybody that we received the mail. We cannot lose the mail. And that was just the simple support requests. What happens if there are other more complicated systems involved? Basically, we need to kind of govern these things. Another typical answer, well, I just want to create a test environment. Let's say we have service configured in such a way that you're pulling emails from a mail system. Let's say your test environment basically managed to pull the email before your production environment. The test environment could have answered that, well, I'm going to process this email. The associate that is actually handling a request, he's not working in the test environment, he's working in the production environment. Basically, what happens is that a customer out there is receiving acknowledgement that his request will be processed. It will not be, because the associate never heard about it, because it was the wrong environment processing it. Yeah? And then we kind of moved from something that we can see an obvious error in another system to actually something happening inside the product. So you can't just isolate it with the scope or process or boundary. The product itself needs to know about this kind of sandbox thingy, right? Your business logic needs to know about it. What if it was a CRM script that used a REST method and called another system with some sort of event, right? Which CRM script should you block? Which shouldn't you block? Should you block certain functions in the CRM script? Couldn't you automatically mock pretending to be the other system? How will we solve this? So we've been thinking and basically realized that the problem is hard. The first version we made, you basically looked at, well, this is the kind of background processing we are doing in online. Let's just stop that, right? And we should be okay. It doesn't really help much because we are still receiving emails from Mailgun. So Mailgun thinks it sent us the email. We're not responding to it. So the email is lost. If we only stop this. Just run through this quickly. eJournal Cron, you all know from on-site. We have an eJournal nightly. We separated out the stuff we only do once a day from what we do all the time. We have ERP sync. I mean, you definitely want to stop that, except if you are a developer of sync. Then you want to make sure that your test tenant is actually syncing data to your test ERP system. Free text, maybe not so important. Measuring resource usage, not so important. We have some natural nightly jobs in the online environment team. We don't really think too much what's actually going on there. The product team is putting stuff in there. Is it safe to run that in a sandbox mode or not? That is something we need to deal with the product team. Resume or delete customer is basically some licensing and provisioning stuff. Saint, probably not a problem generating that because it could always be regenerated. Termination, I don't know if it's bad or not. Sync inbox, probably shouldn't sync inbox, I don't know. It's IMAP, so unless you say that mail is read. If you go into a test tenant and you read a mail, should it then be read in the mail system? Should you stop receiving mails? Maybe you're actually developing something where you need to see the emails. To handle it, maybe you reconfigure it to a test mailbox, right? After reconfiguring it, it should be okay to run it, right? So when Guttorm wonders, why haven't you finished the sandbox? This is a problem.
We need to build a big castle.
Yeah, sandcastle. Parallel universe would be great. Can we just fork this universe and we could do what we want in the other one? Okay, so we spent some time talking about when we are sandboxing, what are the boundaries and how should we isolate. So assuming that we found a solution to that, the next question is, how do you transition in and out of this kind of sandbox state? Well, if you have this temporary sandbox state, it's fairly easy. You come to a certain point in time, we enter this sandbox mode. Maybe it's only that consultant that is allowed to log in, maybe you can stop everything. He does his import. If it works great, continue, everybody can log on, continue daily work, and we're all happy. If it doesn't work, we just restore the snapshot from earlier, and we're good to go. That is not really working when you are developing an app. What you typically want to do then is I want a copy of this environment. People love copies of production environments. We shouldn't because of GDPR. They still would like copies of the production environment. There's no real way about it. We could, of course, anonymize data or simulate data or whatever, but it's always a situation where you want to have a copy of that production environment to play with. So that means you have your tenant running. We are forking out into a copy. We are in a sandbox mode. There's never going to be a way where we can extract the changes made and merge back, right? So that means this is a dead end. So then you have a concept where you are actually forking out. This fork could be from an on-site tenant, it could be from online tenant or whatever. This is what we think of when we say test drive 2.0. You take your on-site tenant, you migrate it to online into sandbox mode. You could do whatever preparations you want and see if online is the thing for you. And then you do a new migration at a later time and go into production. And then we have a combination of this. Typically, you started off with this kind of temporary sandbox mode, and something went wrong, right? And you did this late at night, you're very tired, you want to go to bed, you don't want to research anymore, you want to research it later. So you fork out from your current sandbox state to a new environment, you roll this one back to the previous mode to continue. Everybody can work as they want in the next morning in the office. You, on the other hand, have an isolated test environment where you can actually try to figure out what went wrong and why. You can play with it and try again the next night. That is the easy part. But what we mean by those boundaries and isolation, that is the hard part. So this is my last slide. So what is the next thing we're playing with? In parallel to the Cirrus project, we have a problem of growth, right? I know for financials, growth is not a problem. 4% per month, year in, year out, is a problem for technicians. There's always this next bottleneck you have to address. The current next bottleneck is how many ports we can have open through a proxy server that deals with overload balancing. And that is 65,000 something theoretically, but you need to have other ports open as well. And we are about to run out of ports. We have passed 40,000 open connections in the middle of the day. And you need to have some extra in order to do something, just in case something happens. So basically, we tried different strategies, tried different alternatives running the proxy servers with ports and more network cards and everything. And we are now at that point when we need to have multiple public IP addresses. So there will be a second public IP address, and that is where you kind of see the start of this second environment maturing, right? And there will be more in the future, but now is the first time you will see that. And why is that important for you? Well, if you hard-coded URL to the online environment that you get from the login page, then you're in trouble because that might be a different location. We'll make sure that request to the old environment will access the same customer for a while. We will not move existing customers. We are betting that growth on the existing customer base is less than churn. So if we are actually growing more on existing customer base than we are churning, we have to do some tricks and talk to some customers and think that we'll get a new public endpoint. And it has to be SuperOffice.com because of certificates and a very long story about shared state and IS and everything like that. So you need to be aware that you will see more endpoints. You already today you get the URL you're supposed to use in the JSON web token from the login page. If you're using that URL, you're good to go. And you can assume that you're not moving existing customers without talking to you. We want to continue on what we are playing with VS Code and CRM script. We're also making a console application where you can do the same kind of things. I am quite sure that we will use that internally, rolling up between the different 1 DB instances we have in SuperOffice. Øyvind is probably our first customer for that. We will make that available in the community in the same way as the VS Code, and we will start implementing Sandbox. Implementing Sandbox means that we will need to talk a lot more to the different product teams and figuring out what a Sandbox means for the product, because we need to build Sandbox capabilities into the product itself. That is probably something you can utilize on site too in some sort of way, but I don't know how. I don't even know how interesting it is, because everything in the future is online. Yeah. And the idea of being able to migrate a big customer to online and test everything, that is something that everybody wants. We want to do it, but we need to sort out some more details around the Sandbox mode first. Yeah. Any other questions or comments to the Cirrus product or project? Are we working on things you need and want? Yeah? Are you looking forward to being able to have a Sandbox? Yeah? Do you understand why it's not finished yet? Good. No? Comments? Anybody? Questions? No? Hey, Guttorm, Marek, Hui, Tony, everybody willing to answer?
Are there other priorities that you think that we should have?
There are some scenarios.
Able to customize skill is going to be important. That needs to happen in online. You need to have tooling for doing that. And we think, well, I think it looks like something like this, where we actually are doing some sort of skilling inside here and pushing it down. I think that's the direction we will be heading, but it's not going to happen very soon. You need to do piece by piece. Mm-hmm.
In my mind, it's kind of obvious that it has to happen. Like I was talking to Tony today, and like you say, you created the most expensive CRM system on the planet, but once we go online, it's not so expensive anymore. So for me, it's kind of obvious that it has to come. We don't push you guys because it's so obvious that this has to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of like hope that you share that same thought, that of course it's coming online.
I think that I didn't get a chance to show it yesterday during my presentation specifically. I showed you all of the possibilities that you could do in online, but we were very short on time, and I wanted to really get to Dr. Song's work on the VS Code editor. So I skipped over basically the limitations in online. And there was a very strong message there that I did want to convey, and it was basically that one of the biggest complaints we get from partners is that exactly what you just said. You don't have the same capabilities that you do in the cloud as you do in on-site installations. So the research project that this basically entails. I mean, that's the big message that we want to push out there, is that we are looking into ways to be able to facilitate those things and create truly custom code solutions in the cloud, so that you will have the possibilities in the future to have all of the same capabilities for customization in online that you do today in an on-site installation. Does that mean re-architecting the way that we use document plugins? Very well, possibly. Sentry plugins will have to be thought about, because these are things that are so low down into our system that they need to be super fast and super quick. You just can't, replicate the interfaces and put them into a CRM script and then just call the CRM script every time some sort of sentry needs to be called, because there's a lot of marshalling that goes on between those systems, and the latency is just going to kill the performance. So how do we do those things? And so right now, I think we're just mostly focused on the things that we can tackle in a smart way first. And as developers, we're always optimistic that the solutions for the problems, those types of problems that we don't know how to solve today, we'll figure out in the future, and they will come to light. Yes.
I would like to add a comment regarding the Sentry plugins. It's my belief, though I haven't yet measured, that there are not too many of those out there. Which means that the way we offer plugins today, that you can write, arbitrary code, whatever C# you want, and plug it into the Sentry, is probably not necessary in the online world if we can collect together knowledge about what the current Sentry plugins actually do. We might be able to find some middle-of-the-road abstraction that is powerful enough to address those use cases and a reasonable universe around them, without going all the way to program anything anywhere. Which means we'll have to reach out to you, or you talk to us, so we find out what it's actually being used for. Because at the bottom end of that pool, we have the Sentry preferences. And at the other end, you have the plugins. And I think the online version is going to end up being some kind of middle ground between those two somehow. And I think that's the goal to shoot for, because going all the way one way or the other is probably not going to be either possible or satisfactory.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, do customers don't want to be upgraded every 3 weeks? That's what you're saying, right? Yeah, we have decided not to, because there's a significant cost with having a tail of versions. That means bugs will not be fixed. Right now we believe in rolling forward, right? So the short answer is no. Considering that we would have some customers learning on a more seldom update, for example, saying that we have some versions staying for a long time, some for a shorter time, could of course be discussed, but I don't think it's, that's not really how the world works. I mean, you cannot hold back Azure, you don't want to hold back Venus updates, there's so many things that need to constantly be updated. So I think we are actually creating a big mess for ourselves if we start to move in that direction.
But it would be very interesting to know why they want that, because their reasons for wanting to control the upgrade might be satisfied or addressed in other ways than by postponing the upgrade process itself.
Yeah, the main was certainly something where people become before. And users get confused.
That's great input. I think the main point I want to make is that the decision to do what we're doing did not come lightly, and that was one of the very specific cases that was considered. We had this conversation through our research within the first 6 months. That was one of the big factors to try and determine, that puts you on the edge of whether or not we should support the capability for partners or tenants, customers, to be able to freeze their version. It was considered, it was weighted very heavy, in fact. But the benefits of continuing to go forward outweigh that argument.
But if you're talking about only features, we are actually feature toggling things we are developing. So there is a even like faster changing route than most customers experience. And that's when we are turning on the feature toggles. Then they get like halfway made features. So we try to make sure that the features are completed before we hand them over. I don't think that the wish to being able to, in very much detail, control when everybody gets what feature after it's finished, I don't really see the world heading in that direction. It's very easy for everybody to coordinate around dates because it's something very concrete. But to me, it doesn't seem like that's how the world is moving forward. When you finish something, you kind of want people to use it as soon as possible because it is an improvement. And when you're working on something, you always think it's what you know how made is better than what you had. So you don't really want to delay putting it out there. But it's very important to be able to fix bugs and issues as soon as possible, yeah.
In the most simple case, you can just
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have had, especially through the GDPR round, we had feature toggles, and we only turn off or like remove feature toggling when things are finished, to try to avoid some of the, like, we don't want to ship something that's half finished to a customer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, once the feature is completed, we turn the toggle on for everybody. We leave it on for a couple of sprints, and if we do not get any negative feedback, we then remove the feature toggle from the code. Because otherwise, every feature toggle represents a variation point, and strictly speaking, we should be testing the code with switched on, switched off. You accumulate a number of feature toggles over time, your test matrix just blows up. So it's not meant as a mechanism to be able to influence, for customers to be able to freeze on a certain functionality level. It's a mechanism for us to be able to release things in a controlled manner and then move on. Yeah.
We try to play also around with the terminology of publishing and releasing. So releasing are what we do with the bits, and publishing is basically handle those feature toggles. So it seems like controlling publishing of new features could be just as important than the releases. Yeah. Can I get a microphone?
Q&A does come up a little bit later, but yeah.
It's not a queue. There's a significant benefit to this continuous rollout because the user training is continuous. In my experience, most users really hate it when you have a major update, because then every new change, every new thing to train for come at once. So we have 2 weeks with very low efficiency. So, but when you have it continuously, you take a little bit every 3 weeks, and the net result is much better.
That's one good argument, definitely.
Yeah. I should also note, we should probably bear in mind that if we are making big changes, it's important that we are communicating that in advance, I guess, to meet those demands as well. Yes. Thank you.